episode 219 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Penny in New Zealand, Sarah in California, Shelley in Florida, Sarah in Georgia, Emily, Christy, and Pamela in North Carolina, Kim and Linda in Texas, and Carolyn in Virginia. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now a word from our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning Pebble Go research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. And now in a segment I like to call Why I Love Capstone. Friends, I always like to showcase series which I feel are going to have applications both in your library space, but also with the teachers you support. And in this case, there are 14 books in this set called 10-Minute Makers. I've included a link in the show notes, and I'll read from the copy. Makerspace Activities Stat. Whether your library makerspace is new or seasoned, this series is packed with quick, self-guided projects and activities that are sure to please and won't break the bank. From duct tape tablet holders and yarn mustaches to paper beads and bubbling lava cups. These fun projects will have kids making in no time. I think Capstone really has figured out the magic combination of 10-minute and this idea of very sort of low or no budget types of projects, which are very sort of easily reproduced in a library makerspace or even at home. But these are fun books which students can check out. And I love the fact that these are manageable. You can do them within a class period. They don't require a long dragged out process at all. And I'll give you an idea. We've got books that are 32 pages each. The copyright date is 2022, and the titles include 10-minute art projects, crafty projects, drawing projects, duct tape projects, engineering projects, and that would be great for your STEM/STEAM objectives that you might have or you're supporting, as well as the 10-minute game and gadget projects, the 10-minute kitchen science projects, and those are fun because obviously you get to make things in the kitchen but tie in those science concepts. You've got the 10-minute nature projects, as well as the 10-minute no-sew projects, the 10-minute origami projects, the paper projects, the science projects, the upcycled projects, and the yarn projects. And friends, I was curious, so I went back to the description for the 10-minute engineering projects. Searching for easy engineering projects for your makerspace, you've come to the right place. From winches and gears to bridges and marble runs, these 10-minute STEM projects will have kids making in no time. I am so grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for today's episode, End of Year Reports, and my conversation with Kelsey Bogan. Kelsey Bogan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me again. It's like something I look forward to every year.
I'm hoping we can check in every year. I follow you on social media, and then I just want to every once in a while check in because I don't want to tap you too many times. But, friends, this is Kelsey's third time back on the episode. This is your hat trick. Friends, if this is the first time that you are hearing Kelsey, she is absolutely phenomenal. You want to make sure to revisit episode 134, Ditching Dewey, and episode 198, Genrefication. And spoiler, every time I interview Kelsey, it's because she's already written about the topic.
Yeah, I do actually kind of feel like our mediums coincide really nicely because we do kind of I'll get ideas from your episodes and then you'll get ideas from mine. And because it's speaking versus writing, there's so much more to explore either way. And I think that is an interesting pairing.
Your blog posts are very deep dives. You get into the minutia. And I'll be honest, I would like to think that these long form interviews are also deep dives. It's just listening rather than reading.
Yeah. It's what I like about it is I like to kind of parse out the details and dive into the whys and whats and what happened and what to try next. And that is, but I do know my posts can kind of be word vomity for a lot of people. It's like a stream of consciousness of me, that's what my head is like.
I like to think of it rather as you're just sitting there next to me. When I read your blog post, it is very conversational. It sounds, there's a great deal of personality in your writing. And I tend to think of you as rather sort of not snarky, but irreverent about our profession.
Yes, I know. You gave me that word and it's in my Twitter bio now because it's true. It is true though. And it is what kind of drives me to do a lot of things I try. I think it is sort of a lack of, and just as an autist, that's kind of a not an unusual characteristic, is just this sort of lack of adherence to a tradition. I never really understood doing something just because it's been done before, because it always has. So I think irreverent is a pretty apt description, because sometimes I'm why would we do it this way? Oh, just because we always have. Well, that's not a great reason,
I think I have another word for you. You're unfiltered.
Yeah. I'm getting a little more filtered now in this current day and age, but yes, that is another apt description.
But I appreciate that, because I think all too often when we try to manufacture something and make it sound more than it really is, I think you have a very sort of down-to-earth appreciation for the fundamentals of our profession. And friends, every time I go back to an episode, I'm I look at Kelsey's writing and I say, that could be an episode, that could be an episode, that could be an episode. And I hope that you're not done talking about these topics, because I really want to tap your expertise today about end of year reports, because I really, really loved reading your blog post. Let's first give everybody some context. If people aren't following you on social media, give us an idea. Describe in the country, where do you work? Tell us about your current library. What grades do you support? About your programs? What kinds of things do you really get excited about in your library?
Sure. So I'm in Pennsylvania. This is about my 7th year school librarian. I'm at a high school, so I work with grades 9 through 12, and we're in a suburban area, so quite a lot of pressure AP classes, college preparedness, preps, kind of program. So a lot of what I do is actually more towards the community building side of things rather than the academic side of things, because we have a pretty strong staff that is prepared to help students with those needs. But what our students actually needed more from the library was that social piece and that community building piece and that brain break piece. So a lot of my program is built towards reading for pleasure, promotion, just because of course it is. And, but then also a lot of community building, creating a space where they could take a break for a minute and connect with each other, put their phones down, put their homework down. And so a lot of Makerspace and community connection, social collaborative activities and that kind of thing.
Well, and friends, you're going to have every reason in the world want to follow Kelsey on social media in all the platforms, because whenever I follow things, especially when you're posting your displays, all of a sudden, especially as a very new to high school librarian, I want to buy everything you have in your collection. I think I posted last week, I covet it. I covet your collection. I just want your collection. If you can just sort of transplant it into my space, I'm so impressed. You know, friends, if you don't know already, Kelsey is also adjunct faculty. She regularly teaches a class of aspiring library students, you know, as a librarian by day and an instructor by night. Those were my favorite in library school, by the way. What has this experience as an instructor taught you either about our profession or about this next batch of school librarians coming up?
It's been really interesting. And yeah, I think there is a deep appreciation from the students who enroll with me that like I'm in the field right now. And so I include in my weekly lectures like a day in the life snippet, and I like literally just tell them what I did at school this week, you know, and I know I would have appreciated that because our job is kind of mysterious and you don't really know what it happens behind the scenes day to day. And so I just started doing that just for fun, and apparently it's pretty well appreciated, especially the people that are interested in secondary librarianship, so they could actually see like what a high school librarian does every day. But yeah, for seeing what's coming up in the profession, it's been really eye-opening for me because well, first of all, I get a lot of blog post ideas from the questions they submit. So I'm not too proud to admit that they're inspirational for me and things that I'm like, oh yeah, we should delve into that. Or yeah, I want to explore that. But for them, I've been really, really excited because the questions that a lot of the students submit really shows a move in the profession. Like this upcoming, you know, these new upcoming librarians are much less beholden to traditions. They're like eager to want to interrogate, you know, the ways things have been done in librarianship. There's quite a lot of interest in interrogating personal bias and bias in how policies are in libraries and how that profession is moving forward. So like I literally get to teach librarians about thinking about ditching Dewey. How cool is that? But I thought I'd get pushback from them, you know, but no, they're like, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. Let's see, what are the issues? What could we do about this? So it's been kind of exciting to see like that these are the ones going to be coming into the field over the next several years, you know.
Well, and friends, I recently was interviewed for a podcast, and we were talking about what do we learn in library school. And I sort of did have to make sure that they mentioned the Dewey Decimal System, I said, and it's flawed. And we talked about, and you better believe I was reflecting back on the conversation you and I had about ditching Dewey. And really, when you talk to people who are not librarians, first of all, they don't think we even use an organization system like Dewey. And then they don't understand what could possibly be wrong with it. And I only touched the tip of the iceberg. I could have gone into some great detail because I love that conversation. You know, another thing that mystifies me about people going into library science right now, when I went into library science and I started my degree when the Twin Towers fell, I finished my degree 5 years later when my children were going into kindergarten. And the biggest hurdle we had was finding a job. So our biggest hurdle was advocacy, and that was drilled into us every single lesson. It was this idea that you do not expect to just walk in and have a job handed to you, because there just aren't as many librarian jobs as there are traditional classroom educators. And now people who are going into school librarianship and librarians in general have to deal with the reality that there's a group of people who think we are pedophiles.
Yeah, that's one of the main things I bring to the attention of the students in my course is like, it's really important that you don't go through the program and graduate without understanding what the reality and on the ground is like right now. And it is, you know, unprecedented to say the least, but also very obscure. I think because, you know, librarians like you and I, and a lot of our Twitter librarian friends are very well versed in what's going on. A lot of us are personally dealing with it, or our friends are. And so it's hard to remember that, like, actually most people do not have any idea of the scope of what's going on right now. Like it's hard for me to remember that like people do not know, like my colleagues, people that work next to me, they don't know, you know, the average person on the street doesn't know, most students don't know. And most MLIS students don't really know yet. So it is kind of it's a big kind of, elephant in the room situation, right?
Exactly. Well, and thankfully we have in our PLN some incredibly, vociferous. You got these amazing people who are leading the charge against these sort of armchair activists. And I'm so inspired. And in doing so, sort of putting themselves out there, but raising the profile of what we do every day, making sure that people recognize that school librarians are champions of access to everything. We want to make sure that our students become those critical thinkers in life. This episode with Kelsey has been on my calendar for a while. I think the original blog post that inspired this was last spring. And I reached out to you and said, so not in June, but how about next April? Could you and I talk in April? Because friends, at least in the United States, the end of our school year is incredibly staggered. Some schools end as early as mid-May, and some schools end as late as the last week of June. And the same could be said about the start of the next school year. I have friends who go back to school at the end of July because they go year round. It's a lot. But so I'm glad we're doing this episode, end of the year reports, because it really is timely in so much that if you haven't started to think about what kinds of end of the year reports you will do, Kelsey's got just a litany of different kinds of things that we can do to make sure that other people recognize all that we bring to our schools. Kelsey, you spell out so many reasons why an end of year report is important for all school librarians. I'm hoping you can go into detail why this is such a vitally important process that all of us take part in.
Yeah, so I want to just take a quick side note to specify that I do not think we should only do this at the end of the year. I really want librarians to learn to embrace a kind of a philosophy of continuous advocacy. Gosh, do I wish we were in a profession where that wasn't necessary, but sadly, we're not in a profession like that. There's a lot of mystery about and misunderstandings about what we do and what the purpose of modern libraries are. So I do think that what we talk about today, when we talk about end of year reports, all of those principles and concepts should be applied to a sort of ongoing philosophy of advocacy. I would encourage librarians to think of the end of year as your cherry on top of the cake you've built all year of continual building of information sharing within your communities, both in small and big ways, which we can talk about today as well. But I just want to say that first while people are fresh and still listening, and not zoned out yet, because it is really, really important that we do not just once a year tell everyone all the great things we did. That's so important.
Well, and I two things. First of all, I am aware when I follow people on social media, sometimes they say, hey, here is the September infographic. Here's the October infographic. And, I think that you make an excellent point. So, this isn't just the cherry on top. This is like you want to make sure this is a process that happens and is ongoing. The other thing is, I want to highlight the importance of audience, because you've made sure, because I think all too often the end of year report is something that is just handed to the person who evaluates you. And that is also very short-sighted, very limited in scope when you realize the power that the kinds of statistics that you're pulling up, the kind of data that you're using to drive your decisions.
Yeah. So a couple different reasons why I'm a big fan of end of year reports and really just ongoing advocacy in general. Firstly, from the broad scope, it's really, sadly, very important that we are kind of constantly showing our whole community what our value is and what the value of our programs are. Yes, as you just said, that goes so far behind just making sure your principal sees it, and maybe even more important beyond that anyway, because it's like you're I don't want to use the term stakeholders anymore. I've learned that that's not a good term to use anymore because of connections with Indigenous oppression. But your community supporters or the people that are impacted by your programs, you want to make sure that they all, from the students to the colleagues to the building level admin, to your district level admin, to your board, to the parents that vote in the board, you kind of want to make sure that everybody has a clear picture. And if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. And we currently have groups that are very interested in telling our story for us, very incorrectly telling our story. So you want to control the narrative of your library. And that's what I see advocacy reports and end of year reports as being the main tool for. So like that, yes, the advocacy is big, but also for your own reflection and program development. I think very important, because at the end of the year, the year goes by in a blur. We have all kinds of things happen we didn't expect to happen. We all know what a year is like, right? And it's nice to have that moment to sit really and kind of quietly reflect and observe and then look at what has happened this year with an eye towards what you want to happen next year. How far did you push the needle on these main goals? How much further can you push it next time? Maybe something didn't work right and you can take time to reflect. So I kind of see it as like a two-pronged thing. One, it's for building the story we want to tell. And two, it's for sitting down and that kind of really reflecting on what we're accomplishing and where we want to go next.
Something that made me just realize, last week we had our rising ninth grade open house. So the families of the eighth graders and the parents were all being allowed into the school, into our high school, to really just sort of explore and get a feel for the space and learn about our departments. And it's a wonderful opportunity to showcase all the things that the high school does. And in this sort of stage of the post-pandemic era where we weren't allowed to have families in the schools, I had families of rising sophomores who had never been in the building before. So this was really fun. But I made like a half sheet with a QR code and a did you know about the library, including my email, including the fact that I'm, certified with a master's in library and information science. And I was handing out this little half page to the families as they walked in. Hi, just a real opportunity to sort of introduce myself, handed it to a pair of people, turned out to be Board of Education members. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Another parent happened to be the director of the public library in the community next door to us. And I was like, oh, this was huge. I'm so glad I had something that really sort of encompassed and sort of in a little package gave people a real idea of the things that we're so excited to share with the people who are coming into our spaces. An end of year report would help you start to build all those things that we want to brag about.
Yeah, it's so true. I just had it the other day, I had an opportunity, I call them opportunities for advocacy, when this person walks into your space or you pass them in the hall or whatever. And I was so fixated in my mind on something negative that had happened recently that, when I had that, I missed it. I missed that advocacy opportunity. I was kicking myself, because I was like, grr! I was so fixated on this negative thing. I couldn't get any positive things in my head. So it's helpful if you have those little pamphlets. One of my instructors once called it a 30-second elevator pitch you should always have in your back pocket, for your library program. Just something positive to say to every time you have the chance for an advocacy opportunity. And yeah, and those documents help. And like I have last year's end of year report blown up in a large poster, and I have it affixed to the doors, to the library, right outside the library doors. And I do frequently have other adults who, it's usually adults that look at it. I don't know what that speaks to about my students, but it is usually adults that I find perusing it's basically a huge infographic that I have pasted to the door. But it starts a conversation and it provides some context for people to see like, oh, here's a little snapshot, so yes, it's great for those opportunities.
And that stays on your door the whole year?
Yeah.
Again, friends, Kelsey is an incredibly your personality, it sort of comes through, and I wish you could see her background. She wins the prize for the most attractive background. I believe I'm in my son's bedroom, and this is not an impressive background, but Kelsey, you're such a visual person. And I think that comes through because when you do your end of year reports, you're going to make sure that the representation, how this gets conveyed, is going to be very bright and eye-catching. And we can go into that a little bit more, but you clearly put a great deal into the importance, the value of the visual representation.
Yeah, I think I actually kind of in librarianship, I just stumbled across the fact that I have a sort of marketing mindset. I didn't really have any chance in my life ever to like know that about myself, you know? And so that's been an interesting thing for me to explore. And it is helpful in librarianship because really what is advocacy if not marketing? And so it kind of has been helpful. But yeah, I do find myself, you know, thinking very visual heavy, which is helpful when you're working with teens too, because they live in such a visual multimedia world anyway. So it is helpful. It's not necessary. Now we have so many digital tools that will help you do this stuff. Like, you know, Canva has like Magic Create or whatever, and it will design things for you. PowerPoint has a design option in the I don't know if people know this. I use it all the time, but if you use the browser version of PowerPoint, there's a design function and you could just put the text on the slide and click design and it just gives you these really attractive, it just reworks the slide for you. It's amazing. So you don't have to be great at it instinctively. You just have to know the tools to use to be able to present your information in an attractive or at least visually engaging way, I guess.
And I had my teachers were talking about Adobe Express. Have you done any work with Adobe Express? Because it seems to me like it is the sort of counterpoint to Canva.
I have used it. We've used it a bit. We have subscription for our school, and our students use it for a lot of their infographic assignments because they can collaborate. Like you can add multiple people to a design, and for some reason that doesn't work in Canva for us. I think it's because we're an iPad school. And so, but side by side, I think Canvas has more functionality, and I think Adobe is a little bit more, because it's not as expansive in its functionality, I think that it actually makes it a little easier for students to not get overwhelmed by how many things they can do. So I think there are kind of pros and cons to either, and depending on like how much breadth you want, like, how much scope you want access to, Canva could be good, but it could be very overwhelming. And so Adobe can be a good option, I think, for people that just want a little bit more contained options.
Well, and I think for me, I'm always going to be an advocate for something that at its most basic level is enough that I don't need a fancy subscription. I don't need to pay for any premium supplies. I've been very pleased with getting sort of that educator access and just being done with it.
Yes.
So let me ask you, this is the part of the episode where I do the never have I ever. Never have I ever done an end of year report when I was on a fixed elementary schedule. So, friends, I remember learning about the importance of end-of-year reports in my library media program. I also then spent the next 14 years teaching 6 and sometimes 7 classes a day, and I was basically release time for our teachers in every single situation. I was never asked to do an end-of-year report. I was never required to do an end-of-year report. And in fairness, I felt like saying, look, I'm teaching nonstop. You know what I'm doing. I don't need to justify it because you've assigned me a class every single moment of the day. Mm-hmm. We didn't have extensive preps. We had travel time so I could move from building to building. I didn't create an end of year report because I wasn't in a library long enough. 3.5 hours is not enough time to really sort of generate a really good appreciation for what you've got because you share that space. Mm-hmm. And as an elementary librarian, I'm like, of course you know what I'm doing all the time. You've assigned me classes. So I don't have to tell you what I'm doing all the time. But it's a missed opportunity. Like what I'm saying is, as somebody who is on a fixed schedule, I just sort of said, I get a pass because you're giving me these classes all day long. But I think that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's understandable. Let's just say right off the bat, because you know me and I like to just be honest, we cannot do it all. So sometimes there will be things you'll hear on a podcast or you'll see in Kelsey's blog that you just aren't gonna do because we can't do it all. And that's perfectly okay. So yeah, if you're in that situation and you're like, look, I have enough hats on as it is. I've got all these Chromebooks to deal with all the time. I don't have time to do this. Or yeah, I have 7 classes or I'm split between 3 schools. Like I've been there too. I know you can't do it all. And I think there's an argument to be made for like when you're in a situation like that, it is possible that your tiny bits of time that you may be able to scrape together, there may be other bigger priorities, and that's okay. This isn't always going to be the top of the priority list for everybody. It could depend. If you're in a school situation with a lot of support, you may feel like, look, my energy's better spent elsewhere. They already get it. Whereas if you're in a school where they're not getting it, you might be thinking, you know what, maybe I need to make time for this because they're just not understanding what I could be doing for them,
Well, and along those same lines, I have seen, Kelsey and I are both on library Facebook. Every once in a while, we'll cross paths, but I'll see somebody say, "Hey, I'm trying to convince my administrators to give me either a hybrid schedule, fixed flex, or to go from a fixed schedule to a flexible schedule. And they will use the data that has been collected in their end of year reports to go and say, here are the things that I am capable of doing if I teach on a fixed schedule. If I went to a flexible schedule, XYZ, sort of fill in the blanks."
Yeah, it's great for advocacy, and it is good for telling your story, and just even being consistent with it. It starts to get people used to hearing about you, and that helps too, because otherwise you can just kind of not exist to people, like the library can just be a place that people go all year without hearing from or even thinking about or knowing anything about. You could have colleagues that never once step foot in the library and have no idea what you do in there, and the same with principals, so it does help. But it may be something that gets sacrificed on the altar of time. It's no one size fits all, but it is a tool I do encourage people to consider as a part of ongoing advocacy, just because it is so important that we find some kind of way to tell our stories and to get those narratives out there. And this is one way to do it.
In my limited appreciation of the value of the end of year report, I saw them mostly as an advocacy effort. Self-preservation, sort of to prove that we have value, but proving to non-librarians. I've yet to have an administrator who was a school librarian, and to talk to not only non-librarians but administrators who hold the purse strings and let's be fair, make staffing decisions about whether or not they need a certified school librarian in there, making sure that we stay off of the chopping block. But that fails to recognize the value, those implications that those end-of-year reports have when it comes to that reflection piece that you were talking about. And as we're going to see when we talk a little bit about more specifically about the different reports that you run, the way that you drive those purchasing decisions moving forward.
Yeah, it's so important. There are just so many things in our jobs that we can be spending our time doing. It's hard to prioritize how you spend your limited time. There's a million hats librarians can wear and sometimes do wear. And I know, especially when you're on a flex schedule, one of the biggest questions, one of the things students submit questions to me most often about is how do you even know where to start? What do you do all day? How do you know what to do all day? No one's even telling you what to do all day. It's very overwhelming. So it is important to learn how to identify primary goals, short-term and long-term, and then how to keep yourself on track and make sure you're actually not getting sidetracked on side quests all the time, which is kind of like the whole job all the time, continual side quests, getting you deviated from your goal, so that's what the reports help you do too, is that sit down, that quiet time, that let's see how far off of the main quest have we wandered here? Can we get back on track, or does our goal need to change because of what I'm seeing here? So yeah, it does help you keep that, when you identify you do your needs assessments, you identify your primary needs, your main goals, and then you have to sit every year and reflect to see whether you're actually approaching those goals or whether those goals need to change.
No, and this is something, especially as a new high school librarian, I'm realizing, my counterparts, my teachers come in and they all have their lesson plans or they're working on their lesson plans. And every once in a while they'll say, what are your lesson plans? And I'm like, you mean when I'm not teaching somebody's class? I'm like, trust me, everybody who walks in the door is my lesson plan. Every single person who walks in the door, the first thing is, what can I do for you today? How can I help you? It doesn't matter if it's an administrator, it doesn't matter if it's a superintendent, it's the director of technology, it's a student, it's a teacher, it's a guest teacher. All of a sudden, my job is taking care of every single person who walks through that door.
Yeah, our job is to be interrupted. That's our job. That is, we have these tasks we're trying to accomplish, but there's always going to be a million interruptions because the interruptions are our job as well. And it's hard to stay on task when part of your job are the interruptions. So that's why it's important to do that reflection and to take that time to recenter yourself. And that doesn't mean ignoring the interruptions, because that legitimately is part of our job, an important part of our job. The people that are standing in front of us need something right now. But it's important to be able to have time to reorient ourselves on our goals and make sure we're still able to move the needle on some of the primary goals that we have for the program and for meeting those needs.
In your post you wrote, quote, "Things can get chaotic and fast-paced in our profession, and it can be hard to make sure we are not getting swept along with the tide of trends and personal interests. So it's critical that we pause to reflect on and analyze the data." You actually made mention of this earlier, and you're right, we get mired in the immediacy of what we are doing, and it's hard to like you said, recenter ourselves.
Yeah. And just to like always be connecting what you're doing with needs, am I doing this because I saw that it was cool? I saw somebody on Twitter do it and thought it was cool, but can I tie this to any actually demonstrated needs in my particular school community? Or am I just getting swept along here? Because that's when you get that imposter syndrome and that keeping up with the Joneses feeling is like, I'm running to keep up, but am I even moving towards the goals I set that we set together as a community? And that's where you get the quicker burnout and feelings like you're not doing enough. And all of that is just not accurate anyway, because we can't do it all, but we can sometimes get caught in that hamster wheel, feeling, I think.
Bingo card for this blog post. One of the bingo things that I'd love to cross off is data driven, because I think you talked about your decisions being data driven, and that to me reminds me that ultimately my principal wants to make sure that I am a responsible steward of the budget that is allocated to us, that I am also how my time is spent is driven by what we have discovered through the data that we have. And I think so much, if we can substantiate what we do using the data collected in our end of year report, all of a sudden we can be incredibly persuasive to the administrator who is ultimately making those staffing decisions and holding the purse strings.
Yeah, especially because it's really important. I mean, you see on the Facebook board sometimes people are very frustrated that their bosses don't get it or don't understand, or their colleagues don't get it or don't understand. It's really important to take a step back and remember that they literally don't. They can't. Just like there are parts of their job we can't understand unless we've done it. Like, I came into the profession right into library. I didn't go through education first. So I wasn't a teacher first. And so there are parts of their jobs that I'm never going to get. I try to get because I want to be a good colleague, but they don't get prepped for what school librarians do. And then they come into the field and they have school librarians that all do different things. And some of them do a lot and some don't do a lot. And then they're confused. What exactly does the school librarian do? I've been at 2 schools where they did completely different things, so it is important for us to help them too, to understand. And so, yeah, having these data, even when it's qualitative data, it's still helpful. And to sit down with your bosses, if you have a relationship or are trying to build a relationship where that's possible, it is helpful to bring some actual info for them. Like don't assume that your bosses have any idea how much databases cost, because they do not. They have never purchased a subscription database. They do not understand that it's going to take 70% of your budget, or whatever. Don't expect that they know how much a single hardcover book, when it's processed, costs and how many books per student is appropriate. They do not know. So you have to bring them that information so that they at least can make informed decisions, if nothing else.
I had a strange conversation with a principal once who, thought they were being really generous with how much they were going to allocate and this was after we had paid for the databases. And I was very smurfed because, in my opinion, databases shouldn't be coming out of the library budget. It should come out of the instructional budget. It's like a textbook. And so many of my friends, there's a digital budget and there's a different budget from, our library space. And when my principal said, "Oh, well, I'll give you this much," and in my head, and I go, that is 71 cents per student. Wait, compared to an educator, yeah, maybe what you think you're giving me is wow, that's really generous. It breaks down to 71 cents per student. Wow, thanks.
Yeah, and they just don't know because they don't have the conceptual. They can't make that kind of connection, so you have to, it's like, okay, well, I'm dividing it by 1,400 students and 7 different goals. We have the book goals for fun. We have the book goals for curriculum. We have Makerspace, projects. We have, author visits maybe that we're doing. We have supplies, we have lost books. So we don't have to fine our students every time they have an issue, let's divide it. When you divide it by all that, then you have the databases and the ebooks and the technology. And don't forget your library management system. That costs something every year. They don't know, so it is helpful to put together actual concrete informationals for them and to meet with them and go over it, because they still might not give you the budget. Let's not pretend like everybody's going to get what they need, but you definitely won't get what you need if they don't know what you need, and they don't, unless we tell them.
We're going to be talking about circulation stats and things in just a minute. But, I think it's awfully important for them in my end of year report to see what your budget was and how many books you were able to buy. Because including for me, I think they need to see that this amount of money will buy you this many books because they don't get it.
No, they have no idea. And they don't understand how many books are needed per student. And then that it's we're meeting different age levels and different needs. So you need to have books that sort of have different levels of complexity, as well as different styles of content, as well as different representation, as well as different page counts, as well as different blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. The money gets shorter and shorter the more categories we need to spread it around, right? They don't get that.
Can I ask, because when it wasn't included in this blog post that you wrote, but do you feel it's appropriate to mention things like fundraising? Because for so many people, that book fair that they might have, that is their budget. So do you feel that that's something that should also be included in an end of year report?
I would. If I were fundraising for the funds needed to make all this great stuff happen, I would sure not keep that quiet. I mean, you first of all, you shouldn't be having to do that. So that's a bonus. So yeah, you should brag about it for sure. But you should also maybe use it in private meetings with your admin to show here's how much I was able to raise. And here's what we were able to do. But because of we didn't have a budget, this is what we weren't able to do. It's important that they know what's not being done too. And important that they don't learn to kind of rest on their laurels. You're going to go out and kill it with the grants and all this. So yeah. Oh yeah. If you're getting grants and fundraising, I would brag about that almost nonstop because they deserve to be shamed about the fact that you have to do this and that you are doing it, frankly.
Exactly. When it comes to fundraising, unfortunately, not every district has the go for it kind of attitude. I've encountered you can't fundraise because if you do, it makes it look like we're not giving you the money you need.
That's true. And they probably aren't. So yeah, but of course, yes, that's a great point. Make sure you are checking with what the culture is in your school and what the expectations are, because you don't want to be accused of shaming your school. So yeah, if you're not supposed to be doing fundraising, then don't brag about it in your reports, but if you are allowed to do it, then you definitely want to brag about it.
Your blog post uses Destiny, and Destiny has a fairly large footprint in American schools, especially. And I imagine, friends, that when Kelsey is going to talk about some of these reports, which she runs with great frequency, and obviously there are in many cases comparable reports in the other circulation software programs, and we did an episode on circulation software, and consistently people said one of the best features or selling points, in addition to ease of use and it being intuitive, especially if students are using those circulation software, is also this idea that you can easily run a variety of reports that would give you the kind of data to make those decisions. So let's go ahead. I want to focus not so much on the process of running these reports, because not everybody uses Destiny, but let's look at the importance of why these reports have value in our space. So the first one that you itemize in your blog post are the collection stats, the historical and the summary reports of your collection. Can you tell us why that has been especially valuable in your end of year reports?
Yeah, so when you're, again, just like with everything, you won't be able to do it all. So each year, you kind of have to determine a scope for what you want to include. And again, just like everything, this is about deciding what your story is. Which story are you telling this year? It may not match every year. I don't do the same reports in every end of year report because I'm not always trying to tell the same story. I'm focusing it on what was great this year. Let's talk about this year, right? So that's important. So for last year, my report was entirely book-centric and reading-centric. That's not always the case. In previous years, I've gone into more programming or more instructional collaboration information or representation in the collection development, that kind of thing. But last year, I wanted to tell the story of the reading because it was the biggest news from the library, is that our students' reading was like astronomically up. And so that was the story I wanted to tell, right? So that was kind of quantitative and kind of qualitative. You know, I was watching all year as kids were obviously reading, checking books out more anyway, asking for books more often, taking more books out at a time than I had previously seen. So all that kind of qualitative data, observational. And then of course I was, wanting to see if that was true. So I was running the circ stats and every month seeing it rise and rise. So at the end of the year, I knew what story I wanted to be telling. So yeah, the circulation history was the first report I started with because that was going to be the keystone for this year's report.
And I find that very encouraging because for somebody like myself, I would find certain aspects of these reports very sort of defeating and very disappointing. And the idea that you are selective in what you showcase is very encouraging, because I think for many of us, we are extremely proud of certain aspects of our program. And then there are some aspects of our program that we realize are, instead we talk about glow and grow. we want to brag about the glow, and the grow aspect is the one that we're like, yeah, that one's, I'm going to have to work on that some more.
Yeah, well, like collections and programs and libraries and everything is in constant flux and continual growth and different levels of that growth, right? Just because you can't see the seed in the dirt doesn't mean that it's not going to be growing into a flower soon, yeah? So it's okay. But there's also, if you took a picture of the seed, there's not much to show yet, right? So it's okay to go on to the other garden and show those pictures instead for now, right? Doesn't take away the value of the seed in the dirt. It's just not much to show for advocacy at the moment. We're working on it. So it's okay. I think it's okay to target your narrative to the successes and the goals. Like, it's okay to mention, here's where we're moving towards next year. Here's what we're hoping to accomplish next year. But also, here's what we did this year. So like early in my career, I inherited a collection that was extremely outdated, shockingly outdated. And I was hired specifically to update the program. And so year one, it wasn't going to be helpful or exciting for me to share our circ stats because they weren't great yet. I just started, I haven't had time to make changes yet. So, there wasn't much to show there. So I focused in instead on some of the successful changes we did accomplish, such as some of the weeding that got done, such as some of the collaborations. Like, every collaboration I did was new because I was new. So that was stuff to talk about. We had an author visit. I talked about that. So it's like, yeah, you look throughout your year and keep track of like, what's the story of this year that I'm going to tell? Like, it doesn't mean that we're hiding things. It's just that you can't tell it all. It's a whole year's worth of information. So you have to kind of pick and choose where to place your lens for the year.
Well, and I don't know who gave me this idea, but I love that you mentioned your first year, because if you do nothing else your first year, make sure that you get the average age of your collection when you walk in the door. Like that, because before you have any chance to make any sort of change, find out what you have right now and run some of those preliminary reports. Get an average age of your collection. Just sheer numbers, figure out what do you have, and try to get that baseline, because from there, everything is growth. And it makes it so much easier, because before you weed one book, you get that average age. Because then when you go and write those grants and say, hey, the average age of my books you're not exaggerating. You just haven't had a chance to make a dent. And oh, that's amazing. How about hold stats? It wouldn't have occurred to me, but why do you bother with hold stats?
So for me, it speaks to the change in culture in the library, because students are more empowered now to know that they can take ownership of what's in the library and what they need to see in the library. And so for me, I decided to start looking at hold stats, because early in my career, we didn't get many because students didn't know they could do that, right? They didn't know that they were empowered to put in requests, or that we had connections with our other schools that we could actually help fulfill these requests. And then also, like, I use hold stats to, like, inform whether I should add more books. Like, if I'm always having to request X book from the middle school, perhaps that speaks to the need for me to buy that title for the high school, right? If there's too many people requesting it, that's going to be information for me. But yeah, like, including it in a report, if it speaks to some kind of positive change in your program or your culture, that could be a good one to show. And if nothing else, reviewing it for your own needs is helpful, because again, if you see patterns, that may help inform. I'm seeing a lot of requests for books that are a little bit lower in complexity. Well, maybe that means I have a need for a collection like that in my high school, right? So that's helpful as well.
You also mentioned the value of library statistics, and that's sort of a catch-all, but it's a snapshot of the library, and this is one that you use actually throughout the year. So, what is the value of getting that snapshot? That quick glance of your collection type of report?
For me, it's mostly just because it's like collection development is continual. For me, I mean, some people, it's a little different depending on your budget works, or if you have a budget. But I know some people have to put all their orders in by a certain time of year, and some people don't. So, but either way, you're still making notes usually throughout the year to help you kind of guide you on things. Even things like displays, like, could be guided. It's already in your collection, but you're like, oh, I'm seeing this pattern. Maybe it would make a good display or whatever. So I like to try to, plus it can be overwhelming to, like, not pay attention until the end of the year, and now you're going to try to look at everything at once, right? But I'm a pretty reflective person by nature. Like, I almost sometimes, I even feel like an anthropologist sometimes in my own school, and I took anthropology classes, and so that's why I make that connection when I was in bachelor. But I find myself, like, just watching students and like checking for patterns. I'm like, why am I always seeing kids doing this? Or why are kids always pulling this chair over here? Maybe that means they need a chair to be there. I don't know. So, like, just that continual observation comes naturally to me. And so I check in on my stats pretty regularly throughout the year, just to help me kind of keep my finger on the pulse. But also just to help me not become overwhelmed at the end of the year. So I kind of know where I should be focusing my attention.
Kelsey reminds me of a conversation I had last summer with Diana Rendina of Florida, because she does talk about the anthropology and watching the movement and watching how our students engage with the physical space that we provide for them, and making sure that we are facilitating how they move naturally to make sure that we aren't obstructing, we're not creating unnecessary barriers. And I'll include a link in the show notes, but that's a library space and makerspace episode from last year with Diana Rendina. The thing that I think library stats, that quick glance, is where you're going to get those sort of monthly snapshots, so that for anybody who is being intentional about having an infographic for each month to sort of put out there, flash out to your faculty. It really is a wonderful thing. I've never done this before. Never have I ever. Search statistics. And you are talking about the value of searches with results versus students' searches without results. And I realize that's getting very nuanced, but there's a reason why this is important. Can you explain?
Yeah, so first of all, I wish I could give a shout out to the librarian who I got this idea from. It was like the first conference I ever attended 7 years ago. Somebody mentioned this, and I was not at the point yet where I was keeping good track of where I was seeing ideas at that point. But somebody at a conference, I think at the Pennsylvania State Library Conference, mentioned search statistics that you can check in Destiny, at least you can check and see what people have searched. And you can see both what they've searched and there were results for, and also what they searched and there were no results for. And so that was kind of eye-opening to me, because I was like, yeah, that's so smart, because sometimes they won't tell you when they want a book, and there's some popular book that kids are searching every day, and nobody ever tells you, hey, Miss Bogan, like, could we get this book? I started putting signs around the library to actually tell them they can do that, and that has helped. I actually put every couple bookcases, there's a little sign that says, are we missing something? Please let us know, so we can consider it for purchase. So that helps, but you can check your search results to see, and then if you see a student is, if you see constant searches for the same titles, that's something you can add to your buy list. But you can also, this was an interesting one, you can also see which searches were had without results. And what an interesting tip that this person gave was, look for anything that's misspelled. So if students are constantly searching for a book and misspelling it, and then it's coming up as no results, but the book is actually in the library, that's just that the catalog isn't looking for it, you can take the commonly misspelled version and put it in the MARC records as an alternative title. And then that would result in results for them next time. I've done that with a couple of books.
Oh, Stephen King. Stephen King, yes.
So kids would spell Stephen wrong, like a lot. Like I was seeing it spelled wrong a lot in our search results, and so I just went and added the misspellings to the records for him. So now those show up when they search it.
Well, and I'll tell you, the one I can't spell is Raina Tegelmeier. And so it is funny because when we try and spell that name, I invariably I was getting it wrong about 5 times out of 6. But that you're right. When it comes to students trying to spell the name of an author, and unfortunately, I have yet to find a library circulation software system that predicts what we're writing in such, we're so spoiled by that AI component of Google, because that predictive text, they're like, did you mean?
Yeah.
Destiny doesn't do that.
No. And there are a lot of situations, where if a book title has a word with a contraction in it, or the word doesn't have the contraction, the students will search it like with or without the contraction only, and then it will come up as no results. They don't think to try alternative keywords, which is fair because some of them are very subtle. And so things like that can really stump them. And then it's such a missed opportunity for them to leave empty-handed just because of that. So yeah, doing those checks on your search results really can help you identify first of all, what are students searching for? Because it might help you know what to buy, but also what are they searching for unsuccessfully that is actually in the library, but they cannot find it because that is a barrier to access. You may not realize it's there.
There's going to be your display. Were you looking for this? Because you couldn't find it, but here we go. Right. So you do encourage people to run a report on finding out who your top grades are or your top homerooms are for checkouts. And how would you use that information?
That one's really just for fun. I tend to run the report for top students because I let the students know. They are tickled pink by the idea that they're at the top of a list somewhere, And so I obviously won't tell the whole school that this student checked out the most books or whatever, but I'll tell that student, and it often leads to some interesting conversations. And then it's just something fun that I put on, like I'll put a junior this year was our top reader with 300 books checked out or whatever, but not put their name unless they give me permission to, which is fine. But that one's really just a fun one. There may be more like serious uses for that I haven't thought of, but for me, it's just fun.
It's not unusual for us to do things by homeroom. So it would be sort of fun to, especially if you're doing some sort of, sort of friendly competition, between homerooms and talking about the kind of circulation stats you have by homeroom. that would be fun.
Yeah, there are definitely, I know that there are librarians that do like competitions and things, so those reports would help you get some of that data for sure. And also can just be stuff, like it doesn't even have to be a competition. Like if there's a homeroom that's killing it with circulation, you could just like create a little gift and give it to them and celebrate. It doesn't have to have been like a competition. It can just be like, hey, guess what? I ran this data and you guys are killing it. Here's a little gift, you know? So it can be fun and kind of laid back as well, but still interesting data. Plus it might be interesting because then you might then you're like, I wonder why this homeroom is perhaps that homeroom teacher like doing book talks during homeroom, or are they actively modeling reading, or like it can give you like also some insight to look into like why. It could be a fluke, but it could be that teacher's doing something you might want to know about.
I had a very easy time, and this was especially when I taught elementary. I could always tell which groups of students were regularly reading in the classroom. I could tell which ones were regularly being read to by their teachers. I could tell which ones were being given time during the day for dedicated reading, and it was modeled and it was practiced and it was part of the day. And I looked forward to those classes because sometimes the teacher would come up to pick up their classes and I would sort of put my finger up to their lips and I'm like, just look at them. Just look. And they don't even notice the teacher come in because they're so busy reading. And you're like, this teacher, I always make sure that we praise the teacher. I said, I don't know what you're doing, but it's magical. Because your class, if you could just teach this trick to all of your coworkers, because your class and having those important communications, you know, with teachers saying, look, even through the stats, you can say, I'm noticing this about your homeroom, or that really resonates with teachers and realizes that what they're doing, it validates what they're doing, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it is great to bring that up, like with them, but also like check with them if you can use that for advocacy too, because we know what it's like to have nobody notice what we do and have nobody celebrate it, right? And the same thing is happening for our colleagues that are doing amazing things. And so if we notice them doing something, we are leaders in the school and we can help amplify their good stuff too, to make sure that their bosses know what's happening with them too. Like it's weird. They may not feel confident to brag about themselves, but we can do that for them. So that is also another good like relationship building and community development thing that, you know, you could use the data for.
Well, and you do an amazing job with your visuals. And I just think that the handful of times that I felt comfortable taking photos of my students reading, it was always this class because they always were heads down. It was not hard to worry about there were no faces looking up because they were heads down in their books. And I said to the teacher, I said, can I just take a real quick picture of the kids because they're all reading. And again, those are the pictures that are going to make the social media because the kids are all engaged. You don't have to tell them to do anything. They're already doing it.
Yes.
So tell me, why do you, and this seems intuitive, but the top titles and the bottom titles?
So the top titles is, obviously it speaks to what's popular and what's also being found. So it's not always pure popularity, right? It's also could speak to access. So it can help demonstrate where your successful access is happening. So for example, if you have let's say a book talk display all year, such as I do, and you notice that an awful lot of the books showing up in your top circs are from that table, then you know a couple things. You know these books are popular. You know that they're being found in your collection, which is good. You know that perhaps your display is being successful. So it gives you some information, right?
Can I just back you up? You said book talk, T-O-K, not yes. Book talk, T-A-L-K.
That's right. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for specifying.
Yeah. But it makes a difference because, especially in the high school, book talk would be a reflection of the kinds of things that are being promoted in TikTok.
Right. And so bottom titles, I don't really use that one that often, except for when I'm weeding with a shelf report. That same data would show up in a different way. But you might want to do that one to kind of spotlight, like maybe you want to, like you could do it a display, whether the least checked out books, right? And see if that helps bring attention to them. Or maybe you're just looking at them and you're like, yeah, these really could be weeded. You know, like who knows what the data is going to tell you. But either way, it's interesting to look at it because it helps give you more information.
I worked with a librarian who did it was sort of before books got weeded. It was sort of, I think they did it at Valentine's, and it was Lonely Hearts. So this was the Lonely Heart shelf, like, oh, give us one more chance. I mean, basically saying, hey, are you sure you don't want to try reading this book? Because these are the books that haven't been read in a while.
Right.
And it was an interesting display because obviously after about a month, that's your weed, because you did that display. You indicated to the kids, hey, give this book a try, and if nothing moved, guess what? You did your book talk, and it's as in TALK, and it didn't go. So they're getting weeded. Yeah.
And it's true. And it's like, it's not always like sometimes you may do the bottom 10 report and then be like, you know what? Maybe these books just aren't being found, because we know authors that the name starts with Z, they're going to always be at the end of the bookcase, right? So those authors might just not get seen as often. So you could take that as an opportunity to take those and just put them on display somewhere, even if it's just moving it up a couple shelves, like front facing, give it a chance. And then if it's still no interest, or if you're looking at it and you're like, this is not relevant to students anymore, it does give you information where it might be like time to weed it,
Well, and if you have the luxury of space, I know when I worked with some of my mentors who said, never use the top shelf, never use the bottom shelf. And that's a luxury. I mean, obviously, if you have the luxury of space and shelving, not using the top shelf because kids can't reach it, not using the bottom shelf because kids can't see it.
Yeah, if you're not super attached to rules like me, you could also just swap shelves sometimes, which I do that. Like, if, Stephen King, like, the kids that come in for him, they know they want him. We have a lot of books from him. His books don't really need the prime real estate of the eye-level shelf, but the way that they're shelved, sometimes that's just where the KINs are gonna be. And so I will sometimes just move him to the top shelf, and whichever books have been on the top shelf, they just get swapped. And yes, technically it's not in perfect alphabetical order anymore, so I know some of you will struggle with that, and feel free not to take the advice. But if you are not too attached to rules, and if it's a kind of a foot change, it's like only 6 to 12 inch difference, it can help bring some I do the same thing with the bottom shelf. I don't like that some of great authors are always stuck on the bottom shelf. So I just will swap them sometimes with the 2 shelves up. They just get swapped, and it's like, oh, well, they're just not in perfect ABC order anymore. But that's okay.
Kelsey, I imagine it isn't unusual for stats to confirm something that you already knew or suspected about your collection and your programming. Can you share an instance in which case your statistics revealed something unexpected?
The only one I'm thinking about is I did quick checks to see if books with diverse representation were circulating, and I was happy with the results of what those numbers showed. So I don't know if I was shocked, but I was definitely a little, when you're doing your best to build an inclusive collection, you're still always that little part in the back of your head that's like, okay, I'm buying them. Are they circulating? Am I doing my job promoting and book talking and bringing awareness to great titles from not just the same 5 authors, right? So that was a pleasant surprise. That one was a pleasant surprise. And then the circ data, just in general, I'm always tickled pink to see that one continue to rise,
Well, and I think everybody got really excited because that first year I was in my library, my high school library, there wasn't circulation the year before. So I think we had an increase in percentage. It was 900%, 900% increase in circulation stats because literally no books circulated the year before.
Right. Well, hey, we take our wins where we find them, and that counts for me.
My assistant at the time was a retired math teacher, and his eyes bugged out. And he's like, this can't be right. And I'm like, no, it actually is. Let me explain.
The power of math.
That's right. He's like, it can't be right. I'm like, it is. So, I love how much attention you spend in creating eye-catching visuals for sharing what your reports have revealed. Rather than burying this data in a report, you generate infographics and signage. When it comes to getting the message across to your administrators, to teachers, and to students, what strategies have worked with each of these groups? We're not going to call them stakeholders.
Yes, it is a multi-pronged attack is the only way to do it. I don't know a single librarian who doesn't get a little bit defeated when they see how many of their emails are not read. I think we all have this pain, right? I don't even look, personally. I don't look at the stats on my emails because I don't really want to know how few times they're being read. And this is me saying about how important data is, but some data will ruin you and you just need to turn away from it for the year. So I don't look to see when my emails are read. Instead, I approach information dispersal from a multi-pronged attack to give as many chances for the information to be seen as possible. So yes, if you put your newsletter in an email that it's attached to or is a link, very few people are going to click to open that link or attachment. That is just the fact of the matter, unless you are in a unicorn situation where you have all colleagues with plenty of time and they all read all their emails. That's not the case for most of us. So, I recommend, whenever possible, create a graphic that can be embedded in the body of an email, first of all. And then I recommend doing more than that as well. So, for example, some of the things I do are I put it in the email, of course. I send it to everybody, admin, district level, colleagues, students, everybody. I try to make sure there's as few barriers as possible. So no links, no attachments. It's in the body. Then the next thing I do is I will sometimes have it printed and put it in everyone's mailboxes as well. Just the email. I just print it and just put it in the mailbox as well. I also will recreate it into Instagrammable posts. So usually that's why I kind of design the infographic to be in kind of squares so that then I can take each piece separately as post it on the Instagram throughout the month. And we have a lot of our admins and students and parents that follow our Instagram. So that's probably the most successful method for us. But I also print it out as a gigantic poster and slap it on the doors of our library for the whole year. So I'm giving myself as many chances as I can to get that thing seen by as many eyeballs as possible.
Well, and can I ask, am I right you don't have a poster maker that you do? You have a workaround because it's got a funny name, but I happen to think, if I remember you saying you don't have a poster maker, and yet by the look of your post, you do. And what's your workaround?
Yeah, so I know, don't make fun of me. I didn't name it. The name of the website is with an R, rasterbaiter.net with an R. And it's actually awesome and it's free. It's amazing. But you can design a poster anywhere in any website you want, Canva or wherever, Adobe, whatever. And then you can upload it as a PNG to Rasterbaiter, and you can make it as a poster of any size you want. You can specify the size, and it breaks it down and prints it across standard size printer paper. So it will generate a PDF for you of as many pages as it takes to get it the size you want, and then you can just print that using any poster. Now you do then have to trim the ends and tape it or glue it together, which is time consuming, but if you don't have a poster printer, it does work like a charm, and I have to say, you get quicker at it the more you do it. It's really kind of awesome.
Well, and friends, as somebody who is a devotee of Kelsey's blog, every time you look at it, you share everything. And then we see the images that you have created using this platform, this workaround. And I couldn't tell. I thought you had those professionally done. And
yeah, so you can't tell, honestly.
No, when you look at your library, you've got these gorgeous banners that have been done. And yes, with a color printer, mm-hmm. but standard 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper that have just been, and I think you then laminate them we have a laminator at school that I don't have to pay for. Yes. But actually it's been broke this year. So I've been buying poster board and gluing the posters to the poster. So it's a little firmer than just the paper because I can't laminate them anymore. But again, it works like a trick. No, so. Do make sure that you take a look at all of these amazing blog posts because they're so rich in what you share out. And again, your posters are not posters. They're broken down and you use this workaround. I love that. Most guests I interview have one preferred social media platform. But in your case, it would seem that you have found ways to generate buzz and attention using Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you've talked about how Instagram is the one which you really use with your school community.
Yes.
But I see you, for me, like, I see you 100% on Twitter. I am not on Instagram. I know that I should be, but, you know, again, I sort of pick your battles, but whatever. But you're on Twitter, but that's more for your PLN, for when you engage with school librarians. Am I right?
Yeah, I use Twitter mostly for the PLN. Like, that's where I am most of the time as, like, Kelsey, as just me, as the librarian Kelsey. But for school, our school account, Instagram is the one I found to be the best single platform for a range of ages. So it's good if you're trying to reach students and parents and administrators. I have found that Instagram tends to be a good catch-all in terms of what ages use it. It's still pretty broad. You know, TikTok is obviously getting more broad, but it's still more younger people.
And how many of your TikToks have over 1 million hits? Views.
Gosh,
Can we say views? Are they views? Okay, let's. So we talked about this, I think, in our last conversation. You have quite a few TikToks which have over 1 million views.
A couple, yeah. It's always, you never know when one is going to do that. It's so random, you know, but it is exhilarating and terrifying every time because it's like, oh my, that's people. Like, that's like 1 million eyeballs. That's incredible, but also scary.
Well, and can I ask, when you do TikTok, do you feel that you're reaching how broad, I mean, do you ever get a sense of what kind of viewership you're getting? I know that you're getting obviously a lot of librarians, people in education, but I love your TikToks are great. They're witty. They're fantastic. You've presented on all of this. And friends, again, you're going to take a look at her blog post, and you write about your TikTok experiences. But for you, why is this a valuable use of your time?
So I've quieted it down a little bit in the last year. This year's been, we've been training a new assistant, so I've had to cut some things. So I haven't done as many TikToks this year, but in general, I use it primarily as a supplement to the Instagram for our local community. So just to be able to add video content, and then I share it on the Instagram. So that is really the primary use. The broad audience has been a sort of accidental surprise. Wasn't really my intention. But that's cool. So I see that one more as like a chance for broader advocacy for libraries. And so, you know, there's so many misconceptions that we would love to address and get that message out there. And there just is no platform like TikTok for that kind of free platform amplification of messages. I mean, it's completely random. There's no way to guarantee you'll have one that goes to 1 million, but it has the best chance out of any of them. So that's why I'm a fan of TikTok for library advocacy, just because the chance of getting our message out there is much greater than on any other platform, really.
I completely agree. And friends, again, you know, I've mentioned Kelsey's blog post, and this actually was, am I correct? This started off as an assignment. You created a blog post as an assignment. This would be in library school. But again, all of these, when you write these blog posts, I imagine every single one of them getting their own episode. You know, I'm excited to hear, what are some of your most popular posts? And could you give us a little forecast? What are some things that you might like to do a deep dive in next? Because again, you have so many incredible episodes now that are hugely popular and incredible resources for people like us who are just looking for a little hand holding when it comes to doing just about anything in our space. What kinds of things do you have on the horizon? What would you like to do?
I always have a list of drafts, like of half-thought ideas, you know, that are like gonna be written about someday. The one I'm currently in the middle of that I'm really hoping to get to finish soon is creating a comics collection, because I had to do a lot of research to be able to develop a comic book collection for the library. It's not intuitive at all. Comic book organization and cataloging is myriad and overwhelming. So that's what I'm working on. It's taking me a little time because I want to make sure I write it in a way that it helps people be able to not have as many stumbles as I did doing it. Some of the bigger ones that I want to do is talking about, I always get people that ask like, oh, well, I've purchased, you know, diverse books, but how do I get them to circulate? That's usually how people will phrase it. So I'm trying to get one for that, for like promoting and marketing, your inclusive collections, you know, and because people will always say like, well, our local community isn't diverse, so they're not going to check them out. It's like, okay, well, that's bunk, first of all. And second of all, let's look at how you're promoting and how you're talking about the resources and who you're talking about them to. And so that's the next big one I'm working on, and it's taking me some time. I also have plans to do more dives into the Makerspace stuff, because I think that's a lot of people really don't know where to start with that too, and a lot of questions about that.
Absolutely. Kelsey Bogan, I am so grateful you joined us tonight. Would you let us know, and of course, friends, we'll put our links to all of Kelsey's social media in our show notes, but would you let listeners know, where can we find you on your various social media platforms?
I'm on Twitter a lot. That's just my name, Kelsey Bogan. And like for longer communications, if you need to email me, you can do that through a contact form on the blog, which is don'tyouShushme.com. But I'm on Twitter like way too much, so you can find me there most nights.
And how about Instagram and TikTok?
The Instagram is my school account, so that's GVHS Library. TikTok, I have one for school, the same handle, and I have one for personal, which is my name again, Kelsey Bogan.
Oh, fantastic. Kelsey, I'm so excited that you decided to join us. Friends, I feel very selfish. Kelsey's on spring break right now. So I really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic rest of the school year.
Thank you. You too. And thanks for having me again.
Friends, if you haven't already discovered all the amazing resources that Kelsey Bogan provides in her blog, I recommend you follow her immediately. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. One last friendly reminder, friends, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be packing up and my conversation with Harry Koffel. I hope you will tune in.